What's going on, everyone? Milky here, back again with another one. Today, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour of some of the decks that I personally like to keep in my collection. Now, everyone has different preference picks and things they like to go to, but I thought it'd be interesting for me to take you through some of the decks that I keep pretty much permanently in my collection. Sometimes I tweak them, sometimes I change them out, but these are decks that I tried and tested, things that I absolutely love playing. They might be things that help me climb the ladder, things that I enjoy, things that I go to for missions, lots of different reasons, but these are the decks which I keep in my collection because I think they are awesome. I'm going to take you through them, so let's jump in right now. All right, so the very first deck I have in my permanent deck slots, or things that I keep around, is this Hela Ghost deck. This is a Ghost Rider Hela deck. It's something that I absolutely love. Some flavor picks in there for me are definitely Captain Marvel, and I play around with Death a lot, like having Death in the deck. I think she's great because she gives a little bit of safety to Hela, especially when you're discarding with Lady Sif. I absolutely love this deck. It's a high roll deck, but it's really, really enjoyable. I have a few videos already out on this deck, and I can just say, honestly, I love playing it. So if you do have some of these cards and you do love Hela, I recommend building a Hela list. You're going to have a lot of fun. The next deck is the very first Pool 3 deck that I made Infinite with, which is Wongoing. I recently did a video on this deck, so if you're interested, check that out on the channel. But I love this deck. It's nostalgic for me. It's got a really cool combo if you can pull it off, getting a massive board-wide buff with Spectrum. Look, there's flavor picks in here that not everyone will have, but I personally like the way that this deck is built, and I think it's an incredibly enjoyable deck when you can get full combos off, and even just partial combos as well. Next up, we have the Spectrum Destroyer deck, and for me, this is just such a consistent deck. I think there is a few different ways you can build this deck, some flavor picks in there for people, but this is the way that I've found. I really like the interaction between Claw and Professor X, some flexibility there, but this is just such a budget-friendly but insanely strong deck. I've even seen Sandman being thrown into the mix. I know Binks is a big fan of the Sandman in this deck. It's not my pick, but I think this deck in general is just such an insane deck that can help people do really, really well. It's an infinite deck that you can build so cheaply, so it's definitely sticking around in my deck slots. Next up, we have Patriot, and I do love myself a good Patriot list. Now, there's some flavor picks in here for me, specifically being Doctor Doom. Lots of people run Ultron in this spot, and I can see a case for running Ultron and Doom, or even just Ultron. But for me, I like the flexibility of having Doctor Doom because you don't take up as much board space as Ultron. And I've found that sometimes Ultron is a little bit awkward in terms of board space because this deck does flood the board quite a bit. I don't run Debris in there, but I do run Mr. Sinister. Again, just a little bit of a flavor pick for me. I really enjoy Patriot. I think he is here to stay in the meta. Not only is an enjoyable deck to play, but something that is super, super competitive. So this is my Patriot list. Next up, we have a very, very fun deck, being the VenomPool deck. This is about generating as big a Deadpools or Venoms as you possibly can. It's more focused on the Venom playline. Deadpool is just a bonus in this deck. We did have a Deadpool list, which we really enjoyed as well. But the VenomPool one is the one that just permanently sits in my deck list, just because I think it's a little bit more competitive and the play lines are a little bit more solid. I love this deck. Really, really enjoy it. There are probably a few flavor picks for me in the list, being Death and Wave, including that in this list, but I really like the interaction with them, the higher roll you can get with them, potentially eating everything on turn 5, getting out an early death on turn 4, eating it all with Venom on turn 5, and then doubling down on that with a Zola or a Taskmaster. Do love that playline, so this is something that is permanently in my deck list as well. All right, so we then have my original Mountain Climber deck, a deck which I used to climb the majority of my Infinite climb very early on in MarvelSNAP. This is Elusive GG's Ultron list. It was originally put out many, many, many moons ago in the closed beta, and it originally didn't actually run armor because the idea of the deck was that you bait your opponent into an early Killmonger, and then you Ultron on the final turn. So very interesting style of play. I think now with the amount of Surfer lists that there are out there, armor has become a necessity in this deck, just because of people potentially holding it until the final turn. So armor's in the list, but it's essentially a Zoo deck built around real consistent plays. And I've really, really enjoyed this deck, and it has done very well for me in the past. Then we have what I probably think is my most played deck, because I go to this almost every single day for missions. I absolutely love Dracula Discard decks. I have so much fun with this deck. I think I don't know, it's just such a really enjoyable playline, slamming Dracula down the board, figuring out how you can get the biggest apocalypse possible, and then just doing fun stuff with Lockjaw and Gambit and other cards in the deck. I really, really enjoy the discard style of play and the style of deck. And this is one that just like has negative effects for your opponent. You can discard things on their side with Moon Knight. You got Morbius down there growing constantly on the board. Really, really enjoyable deck to play. Again, we've done videos on this deck, so check them out if you're interested in a little bit more detail. Next up, we've got the Spicy High Roll deck, which is the Lockjaw High Roll. And this one is really about rolling, getting lucky, slamming things on the board through Lockjaw or through other ways. Really enjoy this deck as well. It is a ton of fun. Probably up there with one of the most fun decks you can play in MarvelSNAP, at least in my opinion. We've got some flavor picks in there like Giganto and Magneto. You can do some crazy things with those for sure. Consistency with Chavez, going wide with Doctor Doom, and my particular combo that I really like, which is Thor and Jane Foster. I think this deck just does a lot of different things. It's really enjoyable to play. It does involve some high roll for sure, but I do love the way that this deck is built and the things that you can do if you can draw Lockjaw. All right, next up we have our on-reveal deck, which is based around key on-reveal combos coming out of Wong and doubling down on things with Odin as well. I really like this deck. I think it does lots of different things well. There are obviously many counters to on-reveal, which we have to be aware of, but I really like this deck, and it is very enjoyable to play. You can go wide with things like Doctor Doom and White Tiger. You can focus in on big power in a single location with Black Panther. You can spread it out with Arnim Zola. Lots of enjoyable play lines with this deck. Cosmo is this deck's worst enemy, but it's an enjoyable deck to play, and I love going to it every now and then. We've then got Mr. Negative, and I know people aren't sometimes a big fan of Mr. Negative, but for me, I'm a negative fan. I really like the crazy end turns that you can have in the game with Mr. Negative. I really like the way this deck is built. It's probably a little bit different than a lot of negative decks at the moment, but I really like the interaction between Jane Foster and being able to pull out all of those zero-cost cards should you still have them in your deck. It does lots of different things. It's got some on-reveal things. It's got some ongoing things. It's got some crazy high-roll playline. Magic to extend the game. Does lots of different things. I really enjoy this negative list. Again, have a video on it already out there, so check it out if you're interested in that. Then got a new addition for me, and it's On-Reveal Surfer. And for me, I was thinking about different ways to build Silver Surfer when he came out, and I think not just focusing solely on Silver Surfer was the best playline. This is more of your kind of like, it's got a few different win conditions in it. It's got White Tigers that can come out with Wong. You've got Thor being able to build up power in a single location. It does all of the Silver Surfer stuff. It's just a deck that I found really consistent when I was testing out Silver Surfer. I'm not a massive fan of Silver Surfer, but this was the list that I really enjoyed when I particularly played Silver Surfer. So we've got Sera in there again for the high roll, you know, three cost cards discounted on the final turn, so you can play all those out. It does really well. I enjoy it, but it's not my favorite list, but it's something that I can rely on and go to pretty reliably for something to climb with. We then have Doomwave, and I recently did a video on Doomwave of how you could potentially upgrade a Deathwave deck. Look, it might not be strictly better than Deathwave or Bayro, but for me, it's something that's really enjoyable. So I slam Doom in the deck. There's a few different things you can do with doubling She-Hulks and going wide with Doom. I like the flexibility of this deck for sure. I made a recent video. Definitely check that out. Angel's in the mix as a point of difference to kind of make a little bit consistent of your draw if you can pull him out on the board for free. He's a preference pick for me. I enjoy playing him. It's not for everyone, but for me, Doomwave is definitely a keeper. I love this deck, and it's something that I go to on the ladder with as well. We then have an oldie but a goodie, something that's stuck around for me, which is the Sera Miracle deck. Now, this deck does kind of lots of different things. You have early power plays. You have really strong play lines and turns that build tempo throughout the early game. You've got counter cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress. You've got Arrow and Leader in there as, you know, somewhat of a toxic combo, but I think this deck is just kind of insane. It's going to have a permanent spot in my deck slots for sure, just because of the consistency that it has in the play when you are playing it out, and the competitive nature of this deck, especially into a lot of things that people are running at the moment. I do love myself a little bit of Sera Miracle, and I think this is an awesome deck. Then have another side of this, and this one is probably even more enjoyable, but much less consistent. And this is a recent addition that I've had with Zabu. it's a Sera Discard Miracle list where you're kind of playing things out on the board. You're hoping to get a big strongman at the end of the game, but it still does revolve all around those early plays where you're building tempo throughout the early game. You don't have as much shutdown and counterplay with your opponent. You're more about spreading early power, building tempo, and then having some really strong final turns of the game. It is a very interesting list. I'm not sure that it's perfect in terms of the cards that I've got in there, but this is probably the most solid list I've found so far. Next up, we have our Tempo Zabu deck, and this has got a little discard package in it that we use, and we use this deck to run to infinite from all the way from 67 to 100 this season, and it was an amazing deck. I really, really like this deck. One, it's super competitive. We climbed all the way to infinite, and I've had a lot of people give me really good feedback on the deck that is just, they've done really well with it too. The other thing is that it's just super fun to play. At least in my opinion. You've got your awesome Dracula playlines. We've got Ghost Rider, bringing back whatever you're discarding with Lady Sif. A recent tweak that we've made is bringing Giganto into the list over She-Hulk. I think She-Hulk does still do quite well, but Giganto is a little bit more power on the board. Less flexibility in your plays, but ideally you're not ever playing those cards, so Giganto just gets pulled from Ghost Rider or discarded with Dracula. Love the way this deck plays out. It's really enjoyable for me. Definitely check out our Infinite videos. We've got 3 of them up on the channel focusing on this deck if you're interested in a super consistent and fun deck. The classic Seracle Surfer deck, and it's a very strong deck. It's a meta deck. It's something that is, tried and tested now for kind of across 2 seasons as being a very, very strong deck in the game. Look, not my personal favorite deck to enjoy playing. However, the stats speak for itself, and this deck is kind of insane if you are looking to climb and climb consistently. It does lots of different things quite well, and there's some flavor picks in there for me, like the Nova. Probably not everyone runs Nova in this list, or the Goose. Not everyone runs Goose in the list, especially now with Zabu, but for me, it's been something that's been really solid. It's a go-to that I can do if I do get stuck in a spot, but not my favorite list for sure. Lastly, we have a new addition to my deck slots, and I think this is going to be a permanent deck, or at least a version of this, which is my Galactus deck. Now, recently I did unlock the big top dog himself, Galactus, and to be honest, I was very happy that I did. There are some... He is a little bit toxic in a lot of ways, and I will say that. He is becoming relatively predictable to play around, but man, I don't know. There's something about this deck that I really just enjoy. Sometimes I play around with swapping out Wolverine for Sabretooth or other different plays as well, but this deck kind of just plays itself out, and it does it very, very well. There's, counterplay with your opponent with Doc Ock and Shang-Chi's, lockdown with Spider-Man. It does really, really well, and I'm actually a big Galactus fan now that I've unlocked him. So this has got a permanent spot in my decks as well. The rest are just some test decks, which I leave open, usually about 3 slots, just for testing and trying out different things. Maybe someone wants me to try a deck, or I'm testing out different things for a next video. That's what I leave those for, but that is essentially all of the decks that I like to keep in my top decks and that have, relatively a permanent spot in my lists. I really enjoy playing these decks. Definitely check out some of the videos on my channel if you're looking for specific dedicated videos around those decks. But that's it. Hope you enjoyed the tour of the decks that I keep in my deck slots and things that I like to keep around. Let me know in the comments what you have permanently locked in your deck slots. I'd love to know what people are playing. I'm going to jump off now, but until the next one, I'll see you then.